Mark Muscat, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Alan. I'm well, and how are you?
I'm very well. Great to be here and great to have the opportunity to talk to you about DASAT. Mark, tell me about DASAT.
DASAT is the company I started some 3.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
DASAT also is a shortened term for a very long name.
Oh, give us the name.
Okay, the full name is Digital Access Solutions and Assistive Technology. It's a proprietary limited company, and as I said, 3.5 years we've been on.
Excellent. So, Mark, what triggered you to start DASAT?
I started DASAT when I left a large organisation which I was working for, doing assistive technology training and working consulting in assistive technology. So my background has been always in information technology.
Mm-hmm.
I have qualifications in computer science, mathematics, and worked in the area of internet and web computing for about 10 years, and worked in the assistive technology for another 10 years. So when I left, I wanted to continue in both areas,
Mm-hmm.
and the direction I took was to form the DASAT group so
Yes.
that we could actually maintain training in assistive technology for vision impaired, but also expand into the areas that I was good at in the web and internet computing technology. So that's what DASAT was all about.
Marvellous, thank you. Mark, how would you simply describe assistive technology for the rank and file person who may not even be aware of it?
Assistive technology is a very broad brush, so it could range from very low tech to very high tech.
Mm-hmm.
Universally, assistive technology can also involve sentient beings like dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Assistive technology can also be just even strategies that people might use to work with for their day-to-day lives. So, for instance, I'm a vision impaired person, so I tend to use my spoons and cups for recipes, and they have markings on them so that I know that I'm putting in 1/3 of a cup rather than 1/4 of a cup of a particular ingredient.
So it's a set of systems or approaches or tools that make life easier when you are short of a particular sense in one part of your brain, if you like.
That's right. It's more to do with assisting the person to do those particular tasks so that they can use that type of technology to do that.
Yeah. So in the instance of your cup and your spoon, the cup would have a raised surface so that you know what the measurement is.
Correct.
Yeah. How do we apply that to technology, to a website, for instance? How is that relevant, and how would you work it there?
So when a person uses technology to access a website, they're actually using a number of assistive technologies to do that. That can range from a basic computer system with software that's providing speech output, magnified output,
Mm-hmm.
or allow the user to use braille output, which is a tactile form of reading print.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are blind or low vision.
Mm. Mark, as a visually impaired person, what's the one or two things that you look at and you think, we could do 2 things to every website on the planet that would make it more friendly, more usable for people with some forms of disability? What's the obvious thing? that we need to attend to?
Always consider your website to be something like a stage or a form of piece of real estate that you might be putting things on. Try not to clutter it.
Mm-hmm.
The more cluttered a website is, the worse it is for everyone. And that's not including disabled people, that is everyone will have problems reading information. The other aspects to websites is that using pieces of information that portray or convey the information that you want to convey to all the audiences that you are aiming your website at. So a classic example and a very basic example of accessibility is that when you put an image, the image should have some text to it that describes in a few words what the image is about, so that it will allow you to convey the information of the image to all your audiences. So you're not excluding anyone like myself who can't see the image or won't be able to recognise a person's face from a photo, etc. So if I was to take a photo of you, Alan, put it up on a Facebook entry or whatever, Narelle and I wouldn't be able to see that unless we actually had in the alt tag a picture of Alan.
Right. And that picture for you would be some form of written description or spoken description.
That's correct.
So that you're not dependent on seeing the diagram or the person, the photograph.
Yeah.
So if I reflect back on my use of computers, I can't recall when I saw a diagram that had a written description, simple, clear, concise description. There's lots of text beside it often. So you're talking about simple but significant change.
And one that can always be applied very easily. Most site development environments will now include that ability. So that's something that we highly recommend for people to even start with.
And as a linguist, I sit here thinking, if I'm now writing something and I'm referring to the diagram, I'm going to go the circular diagram with 8 segments. Would that be of assistance that we just referred to?
That certainly would be a prime example of a description for a diagram that would portray information that you would want to pass on to people, yes.
What would be one other... Actually, let me ask it this way. What's the one thing in Mark Muscat's world that he hits with accessibility on websites that he says, that irritates me? It's a very personal one.
I think the one that really annoys me quite often is the way that forms are actually set up. Sometimes there are forms that just don't make sense when you actually go through them, and you're forever having to read or try to make sense out of what they're actually asking for. So forms are probably my biggest one at the moment.
And is that layout or is it wording or both?
It comes down to how they're actually laid the form out and how they've actually put the information in labels, etc. So some of those are missing, some of them are not quite clear,
yes,
and some are probably on the way, but they're not described enough for somebody to completely understand what they're actually requiring in that particular form build.
Mark, do you have an example of layout just to signify what it is that would bother you?
Um, specific example. Um, I've been playing around with the TransLink website. That's somewhat interesting to actually look at, because they've got all the form fields in a way right, but sometimes you have to sort of arrow up and down to find out what they're looking for in terms of the information that they're requiring. That's one example of one I've looked at recently. I guess it comes down to at the time trying to think of other examples that would be. The one I was playing with yesterday was for Dropbox.
Uh-huh.
That's another one.
Yes.
So there was a bit of confusion there with information that they were requiring. Yeah, the third one would be the concept to rowing one, where I was trying to create a team, and that was very confusing. And that was because there was no labels whatsoever. So I've probably given you an example of each scenario that I've just mentioned before.
Mark, I sit here thinking about this and thinking, boy, if I were going to be designing a site, I'd certainly want somebody who was sight impaired to be on the design team. Because I'm sitting here and I hear you say things and they're so obvious. But until you say it, it doesn't occur to me. And because we're so set in our habitual way, we probably need to review who's involved in the design of sites. Is that a necessity?
I think it's essential to rely on human input into any form of testing. So it's imperative that that there be people who have lived experience test and actually use sites to make sure that they, one, can understand it, and two, they can actually access it. And you want to try to get to a level where a person can actually use their assistive technology to access the same website that everyone else can in the same or roughly the same time that a sighted person or a person who doesn't need those accessibility requirements. That's why it's important to really use a good test group of people who actually do use and have a lived experience.
Yes.
The other factor to also play in the whole equation is that with assistive technology, there are people with differing levels of understanding of that assistive technology. So it's important to actually get a group of people who have a range of knowledge within the assistive technology that you're testing for, which is very hard to do because you're juggling a whole lot of other factors in that as well. So as a person who's been involved in developing, training and use of assistive technology and web computing or web-based applications, it's one that is the enormity of actually doing it can be daunting to anyone that's just trying to get a project done in time and with deliveries. So it's probably a good thing to have that knowledge or access to somebody who has that knowledge.
Mark, given what you're saying, it sounds to me like there's a huge opportunity for organisations to really, who are committed to doing inclusion, that there's an opportunity here for inclusion to take place in the design, the development, the testing.
Yes, inclusion is a key aspect to any form of accessibility, especially with regards to technology. We always aim to have apps or websites accessible for people so that they can actually broaden their audience by the fact that they're actually including people who would normally not be able to access that site or app.
Mark, you've talked to me in the past about the international standards and how important they are, and the fact that you guys operate doing audits and design and training around those standards. Can you talk to me about the standards and how you apply them in DASAT?
We use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a set of guidelines that are based on the web accessibility standards for it's not just web accessibility, but it's also application accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
We use those to assist us with conducting audits on sites and applications, so that we are able to give the developer or the client some confidence on their level of accessibility, and therefore the what to expect in terms of including various people in their group of audience. So where they might have a website that is not compliant to the web accessibility standards, therefore they're not including a lot of people because they're probably losing business out of it. By doing an audit, they will see where there are areas to improve. Once that has occurred, that audit can be redone, and therefore they would find that that their websites with the respective compliance being met, they'll gain confidence in actually being able to include more people in their audience groups, and hopefully they'll gain some customers out of that.
I was just about to say that must have some significant flow-on benefit. What would be the benefit to somebody who's...
Well, the significance is always that you want to get more customers. In any business, that's what you rely on, is actually your customer base. So it's important that you work to that effect, so that you are able to get your accessibility right. You get your you find that you're are able to target more groups by having an accessible website, and that will flow on to increasing your customer base, and therefore your business should grow in that context of what you're expecting.
So essentially there's a set of standards, there's a set of criteria, you do the audit, it's against the criteria, it's clear and concise for the people, and that leaves them feeling more aware of what they are doing well and not, and it provides them an opportunity to see how they can gather through accessibility more people joining their website, participating in their website, and fewer people leaving, I imagine.
Well, I think my golden rule on this is that if you can't use a website, you're not likely to want to support that company, aren't you?
Mm.
So it's important to really get to that stage where you know your best referrals are going to come from other customers.
Wow, that's pretty compelling, Mark. That's pretty compelling. So, who's the likely client who's going to listen to this and go, "Wow, we need to do this"?
I think the most. My answer would be everyone, but in being a pragmatic person, I think that there are certain groups that probably wouldn't. But you would say, my feeling would be that everyone can gain from having web accessibility. We've seen that with the arts sector, where we've done some work for art galleries where we've done audio description type arrangements and putting using QR codes or using even NFC tags to allow people to actually go to a website and hear an audio described version of a particular exhibit. Things like that are really big impacting changes to any organisation.
That in that single example, that opens up a huge amount of potential inclusion that wouldn't happen otherwise. That's capturing a new market, surely.
Potentially, yes. I think it's. That's where there could be a lot of work in areas like that. I'd like to see the real estate sector start to look at accessibility as well. That's where the big disappointments are.
What's the big opportunity for the real estate industry?
Well, at the moment, if I was to look for a place, Alan, I couldn't. I'd have to rely on somebody to actually help me find the places on the website, to actually go out and do the actual research, etc. It's very hard to be a visually impaired person trying to find real estate without actually involving other people. And when you involve other people, then it becomes a very subjective thing rather than an objective thing. Subjective because then you're relying on that side of person to actually tell you what they think. So you're not actually going to get, so you're not only dealing with real estate agents that are trying to sell your property and they'll sell you their grandmother's, but you're also getting the person that you're with, so it comes down to a level of trust.
Let me interrupt you there and say, we've got a magic wand and we're going to cast the magic wand over the top of the real estate industry and their website's going to change tomorrow. What are the 3 changes that you'd make that would make it so much easier for you to connect and be involved?
One very simple change that they can do straight away,
yes,
if they really wanted my advice, is to start putting more descriptions on graphics that they put up for pieces of real estate, and actually being honest about those descriptions. It couldn't be too difficult.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt there? So you're saying it would need to be a photograph and a description of the photograph, but the description's got to be an exact factual description of what's there so that you can get an accurate idea of what it is, not selling it as a marketing language piece. No.
So the accessibility is different to marketing in the sense that, yes, they can do the marketing and they should. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. Marketing is very important. You should market whatever you're trying to sell. And I don't disagree with that. I'm all for it, in fact. But when we're talking about content for accessibility, that should not be a marketing thing. It should just be the facts. So if I was to say we were doing a picture of a unit, for instance, this unit for where we're sitting, I would put in there, if it's a 3D picture that we're looking at, and so the description would be a picture from the view above, looking at the floor surface, and it has a rectangular part where the door starts, and then has a corridor to the left where the kitchen and bedrooms, and then etc. etc. So they're the kind of factual.
So it is truly a factual description that would make the difference.
Yes.
So if the real estate industry would have had a photograph and a very specific point form factual description, either in writing or voiceover, that would make a big difference.
A significant difference, yeah.
And that's the sort of simple single steps that could be taken that would have profound impact.
Very.
and keep people staying on the site and accessing and using the site productively.
Correct.
Mark, you talked about international standards and that there's an auditing process that allows us to rate websites. How does Australia rate against those international standards?
I'll defer that one to Narelle.
I look forward to talking to Narelle on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your first piece of advice to any CEO or chief information officer or human resource person? If they were watching now, what would be your two simple, clear, concise sentences that you'd offer them?
First and foremost, don't change anything. Secondly, add things to include everyone.
Right. So you don't have to rebuild your site.
Nope.
It's just add and improve and modify.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty important message. So they haven't got to start again.
No. The bad old days where we used to have two sites, one for accessible and one for visual, should never be ever seen again.
Right. Excellent. So Mark, if there was a message that we could deliver to business decision makers about the accessibility and the potential of the services DASAT offer, what would it be?
Well, I would say quite clearly that I would want their business to grow. But by saying that, you would need to be focused on how you want to grow, but also how you are going to include as many people as you can. And that's where accessibility becomes a very big focus point to make that happen.
That's a powerful message. Can you say that once more for me?
Oh, no.
I need to hear that again. No, I need to hear that again. That's a powerful message. Just one sentence. Say it again.
Important message is that I'd want the business to grow, their business to grow. And the way to do that is to facilitate a growth of inclusion. And to include people, you need to make sure that it is accessible to those groups that you want to include. And then that is the focus of accessibility, and that's what you need to actually to enhance on and actually add to your web or app rather than change.
Yeah, and it will increase business with reliability.
That's right. Yeah. It definitely increases the business and reliability of your information and ultimately your product sales or whatever your business is.
Makes perfect sense. Mark, my final question is, I've heard you use the terms simple, easy and quicker in relation to accessing websites. Can you just say a couple of things about why that's important?
They all pretty much, those 3 points pretty much flow on. So if the website is simple, that being, you certainly can have your bells and whistles and graphics and all the other things. But if it looks simple, if it looks like it's inviting, it looks like it's pleasant, it's not cluttered, it's not like you have to actually go and bang doors just to find out what you have to want to find out. This leads to the easy part. If I'm able to use it functionally well and I'm able to actually do things that I want to do quickly, that leads to the third part, then that would be considered somewhat a start in accessibility. The rest of it all lies in the guidelines that we spoke about earlier, in that that you comply to, making sure that there's text with the graphics, that the animations are actually somewhat useful, and if they're not, you don't need them in the context of accessibility, that sort of stuff. That's where it becomes more in line of making it easy to use. So they're the three things that I always look at on a surface
They're
level.
pretty important and compelling.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's it's always a good way to work with, but functionally it's important to do those things.
Mark Muscat, from one tech person to the chief technical officer, or one of the developer guys, what's your message to them?
It's always best to place your accessibility in the earlier phases of the development and implementation phases, so that you are able to, not just utilise the accessibility that you've introduced, but it will save you countless of hours and money in going back and putting accessibility into the system that you're developing. That's my strongest advice.
So get it in early.
Get it in early, yeah.
Mark, I have, as you know, consulted to many large organisations, and every time they're doing a change, I say to them, do not have a meeting about change without your IT people. And you're saying, make sure the IT people have the accessibility factors in the original work.
Yep, absolutely.
So important.
And the knowledge is really essential. The knowledge of what to do, how to use certain elements for accessibility is highly advisable to have. If you want to make your systems inclusive, definitely.
And saves money and increases efficiency in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Compelling reason.
Yeah.
Mark Muscat, it's been a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.
Just illuminating, Mark. Thank you.
No worries.